Hi there, you're listening to the Guitar Speak podcast, produced here in Sydney, Australia. My name is Matt Wakeling. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hey, I got to say thanks for all the great feedback following our Jude Gold interview. That was episode 32, put it out last week. It's great talking to Jude and great seeing so many people enjoying the episode. Thanks for the feedback, I really appreciate it. If you haven't heard that one, dig back. guitarspeakpodcast.libsyn.com or iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you're hearing us right now, really, and you should be able to access that interview and all of our others. But today we are talking to Alastair Greene, killer player, also from the west coast of the States. Alastair fronts up his own blues rock band, the Alastair Greene Band, and tours the world playing mega hits in the Alan Parsons Project. So he's playing bars, he's playing stadiums. Wherever he is, he's doing some great guitar playing, as you'll hear throughout this interview. Alastair tells us about growing up in California, especially during the 1980s where there was intense guitar playing everywhere. Alastair ended up getting to Berkeley, putting his own band together, recording his own albums. He also tells us what it's like to land a massive sideman gig, as is the case with the Alan Parsons Project. Hanging out with Steve Morse from Deep Purple, hanging out with orchestras, all that kind of stuff. It's all part of a day's work for Alastair Greene. Really good guy too. We had a good guitar hang, so here it is, my conversation with Alastair. Alastair Greene, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. And especially you look very busy at the moment. You've got a whole bunch of your solo gigs happening right now.
Yeah, man, I've got a bunch of stuff with my band coming up, and I've also got a handful of things where I'm going and either subbing for a guitar player or doing a couple other things here and there, and trying to keep it busy through the holiday season.
Awesome, very cool. Now we're just speaking off air. So you are in Ventura, in California.
Yep.
Cool.
Correct.
And did you grow up there? Is this pretty much your home state?
I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is a little further north, and I lived in Boston for a couple years. In my late teens, I went to Berklee College of Music for a couple years in Boston, okay, yep. So I lived there. And then I moved back, started playing in bands, and then my wife and I moved down here when Santa Barbara got a little too expensive to live in. So we've been down here for a while, and it's actually a really good location. It's close to where I grew up and where a lot of the local gigs are that I play, and it's also really close to Los Angeles and cool. LAX. So if I need to go jump on a plane, it takes about an hour to get to Los Angeles, International Airport. So yeah, it's a good place, man.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, when did so growing up out there, when did you start playing? I think I've read that your mother was a piano player. Was she a big influence?
Yeah. My mom played a lot of piano around the house growing up. My father's father, my grandfather, was a professional musician, who played in big bands in the 40s, played with a guy named Stan Kenton. Mm-hmm. My grandfather's name was Chico Alvarez. So there was music, growing up. And I took piano lessons for a while, and I played saxophone for a while. And I started playing bass in junior high. And at a certain point, I was just like, man, I really want to try guitar. So I started playing guitar when I was about, I want to say, 14 or 15 years old.
Okay, yep.
And, I got into it basically through a lot of the hard rock bands of that time and all the great guitar players that came out of the, early and mid-'80s.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I think we're pretty much the same age, Alastair. So you're talking... the mid-'80s. There was guitar on everything. Even the pop tunes had shredding guitar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, guitar was definitely a huge factor in a lot of popular music, and even some of the other stuff that we were probably listening to. So it was just an exciting time to start playing guitar, and there's all these guys that were technically taking things to the next level, which was really exciting. Mm-hmm. I know that some of that's become very unhip nowadays, but I really enjoyed listening to I never got to that point as a guitar player technically, but it was really exciting to hear, Racer X and, mm-hmm. The Shrapnel record label, all those guys, Jason Becker and Steve Vai and Joe Satriani came out that time, and So it was just an exciting time, playing guitar, just listening to all these guys just, going crazy on the instrument.
Cool. Hey, so by the time you got to guitar, so you'd already played, as you said, the piano and saxophone and bass. Did that accelerate your guitar learning experience? If you probably already had a handle on some theory and
Yeah, I
stuff.
mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could read, so I learned how to read music at a fairly young age. And, just by being around music and, just kind of having a concept of, playing single notes on the saxophone,
Hmm.
having a concept of, playing chords and stuff on the piano and obviously bass lines, playing guitar. I mean, it's still challenging and it's obviously a very challenging instrument, but I do feel like I got a pretty good head start on it. And so it definitely kind of informed just some of like the basic theory and reading and stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. And you mentioned, yeah, some of those 80 shredders. Who were some early influences? I guess once you started finding your feet as a guitarist, what kind of songs did
Well,
you want to learn?
when I first started playing guitar, my favorite guitar player, the guy that kind of like I was just like, oh man, I really want to do that, was probably Jakey Lee
Uh huh. Yep.
from Ozzy's band,
Ozzy's band. Yeah.
and then when I was a senior in high school, I think the first Badlands record came out,
Okay. Yep.
and I just immediately loved that. The guy that I was taking lessons from turned me on, kind of started turning me on to the history of rock guitar because I was a kid, wanting to learn Van Halen and Ingve or whatever, and he was like going, "No, man, you're going to really have to learn how to crawl and walk before you can sprint." And so he started turning me on to Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix,
Yeah.
Freddie King. And so I heard some of that stuff, and I heard the Badlands album, and there was something about a handful of these guitar players that at the time I didn't know what it was that I was gravitating towards. I was gravitating towards the blues
Mm-hmm.
influence. And so Jakey Lee had it. I thought Vivian Campbell had it,
Yep.
on those Dio records and even the Whitesnake, stuff that I mean, he didn't really record much with Whitesnake, but I saw them a couple times on tour and
Oh,
whatnot.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was those were kind of my guys. I really liked Warren DeMartini. And again, these are all guys that had maybe not traditional blues influences, but they were definitely influenced by Led Zeppelin or Michael Schenker or
Mm-hmm.
some of those guys were obviously with Vivian Campbell, Rory Gallagher, and Gary Moore. And so those were the guys early on that I was really kind of getting into. And I was in a hard rock slash metal band in high school, and we'd go down and play in Hollywood and stuff like that. And so that was kind of my early time on guitar. I would say between the ages of 14 and 17 probably.
Okay. Okay. And then you went to Berkeley, as you mentioned. That must have been
Yeah.
somewhere around there as well. How old were you when you went to Berkeley?
Well, I spent a year after high school in Santa Barbara, going to Santa Barbara City College, taking some music classes to kind of bone up on some stuff. And
Yep.
then I went to Berkeley. I think my first year there was 1990, so I was there from 90 to 92. I was just there for a couple years.
Okay. Under a
And
scholarship
that,
too.
yeah, I got a partial scholarship. I played guitar in the high school jazz band, and we were doing a jazz competition in Florida. And there was a guy there from Berkeley kind of handing out a few partial scholarships and stuff, so I got one, and that really helped. I mean, it's a pretty expensive school to get into,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandmother had set a little bit of money aside, and I got another scholarship from some foundation here, so I was able to go and spend a couple years there, and it was great, man. I mean, I met some amazing musicians, and also just got my mind blown as far as getting turned on to a lot of different kinds of music.
Okay. Yeah. What were you hearing that was different?
My roommate for both the years that I was there was a drummer, and he had like a lot of Frank Zappa stuff
Okay. Yeah.
and some Weather Report, and I'm just trying to think of some of the other stuff that I had that he had. Um, there was just a lot of different. I got turned on this a lot of jazz stuff. Coltrane and more Miles Davis things from different people.
Cool.
When I was there, the Steve Vai Passion and Warfare album had just come out, so a lot of the guitar players were really into that, and I'd already kind of started getting into blues at that point,
Okay.
and blues rock, and so there was some guys there that were into a lot of that, so I got to hear a lot of Freddie King and Albert King records that I hadn't really heard before, And so yeah, it was neat, man. I mean, there was just a lot of different stuff that I got to hear. Steve Morris, I got turned on to Steve Morris when I was there.
Okay, yeah.
Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin. So just all these great guitar players that were playing stuff. I had gotten into Eric Johnson right before I went over there, and I got to see him play.
Great.
He played at the Berkeley Performance Center, and so yeah, it was just it was pretty mind blowing getting turned on to all that music, and then getting to see some of it too.
Fantastic. Yeah, the idea I had with Berkeley is that you were having like amazing musicians would come through and do a master class or a gig or something, as well as your usual tuition.
Yeah, I got to see Danny Gatton. Actually, Danny Gatton
Oh, wow.
did a clinic while I was there, and
Yeah, cool.
I sat like in the second or third row, and some people have told me that the clinic is somewhere on YouTube or on video somewhere, and you can see my hat in the second row just geeking out on Danny Gatton. So yeah, he gave a clinic, and then he actually played later that night at the Berkeley Performance Center, and it was just total insanity. And then there's a guy named Ronnie Earl, who's a great blues guitar player from the Northeast, and
Yeah.
when I was there, he gave a couple of clinics. There weren't really so much clinics as he just got up and played with his band, and being that I'd been getting into the blues and stuff, I was just like, oh my god, this guy he was just so amazing, and he still is. I mean, he's still putting out records and stuff. I don't think he's touring that much, but he's a great guitar player. And so I saw him, and there was a few others here and there that I saw, and then also just going to see bands that were coming through. Like I saw Eric Johnson, as I said. I saw Alan Holdsworth one time when he came through.
Yep.
Mike Stern. In the blues world, I went and saw Lonnie Mack open for Albert Collins by myself at some little club on the outskirts of Boston with a fake ID to go in and see those guys play. So yeah, it was great, man. It was a really exciting time to be young and in love with the guitar. So
Fantastic. That's such an immersion in it, man. That's amazing.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah, man.
I was hearing all those guys, but obviously they weren't coming down to Australia all that often. Although I saw Holdsworth in, I think it was 1990, and
Okay.
yeah, I didn't understand it, but I knew I should be appreciating it, but I didn't get all of it.
Yeah, well, I still don't understand it. Man. That guy's definitely coming from a different place, but
Absolutely.
Very cool guitar player.
Oh yeah. Cool. And what were you playing around here? What guitar? What was your guitar back then?
Back then, I started on what did I have? I think my first electric was a Charvel Model 3. It had a Kahler tremolo system on it,
yep.
and it was one humbucker and two single coils.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that, and like I said, I'd gotten into playing blues and stuff, and I knew that I needed to step up my game as far as the guitar. So actually, when I was in Boston, I sold the Charvel to somebody, and I went to a music store. I can't remember the name of it, but I got a 57 reissue Fender Stratocaster.
Cool.
And this was in 1990, and I think it was like an early 80s, so it was like kind of one of the first years I think they actually even started doing the 57 reissues. Yep. And I mean, if you look, mine isn't mint or pristine in any way whatsoever. It's really beat up. But if you go on eBay or something and check out those guitars, they're actually pretty expensive. Like just the fact that it was the early years of the reissues, and they were made really well. So that was my first, good guitar. And I'd known Seymour Duncan since I was a kid because he's in Santa Barbara and I was in Santa Barbara. So I'd met him, and so I every guitar that I would get, I'd always put some sort of Seymour Duncan pickups in it or whatever. So I still have that guitar. I've still got my reissue Strat. I don't really play it, that much anymore. I'll record with it occasionally, but it's a great playing and sounding guitar. And I bought that in Boston in I think 1990. So.
Okay. Very, very cool. Yeah. You were just, man, where you were living. What a great spot for all this music.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got Southern California is as far as seeing stuff is great. A lot of obviously bands come through, and like I said, I'm not that far from LA, so I've been able to go catch a lot of cool stuff over the years.
Nice. And were you doing bands yourself? So when you finished up Berkeley and went back home, were you
Yep.
were you gigging and stuff?
Yeah, when I came home, within, I had a bunch of friends that I grew up playing music with, and when I came home, I went and visited a friend of mine, and he had an older brother, and his older brother had this friend that I met and was helping him, over at the house, and this guy turned out to be a really great singer, and so we formed what I would consider, my first serious band. It was called Scarecrow, and that band was, I think, 1992 through 95 or so. And so, yeah, as soon as I came home, man, I just started playing in bands, and that's pretty much what I've been doing ever since, is playing in bands and trying to play as much as possible, and, just gig and record and get better and all that.
Great. When did the Alastair Greene Band start up?
That was formed, I want to say, like right at the end of 1998, okay. I believe. I was in this band Scarecrow, and then I started another band that was a trio, and I was kind of in this headspace where pretty much all of my favorite guitar players, sang, and I wanted to kind of push myself in that direction as well. Just, you got to keep challenging yourself. So I formed a trio after Scarecrow, and then along the way, I'd been going and sitting in with, there was a blues band in Santa Barbara called the Pontiacs that was really well known on the West Coast, and all the guys were amazing musicians, and I became friends with those guys, and I hooked up with the drummer and the bass player kind of originally just to kind of record a demo because I wanted to try and, get a blues band together and go do gigs. And we did a demo, and both those guys, were 10, 15 years older than me, and we're like, hey man, we should go and do this. We should go do a blues trio and whatnot. And I was like, well, what do I call it? And they're like, yeah, just call it your name, man. And so I did that, and so that started, 98, I think. And there's been lineup changes and all the other things that you would expect over the last however many years that is.
Sure.
And yeah, so that was pretty much when I started, my band under my name and doing, blues and blues rock.
Hearing a bunch of your own solo stuff does seem, very much influenced by rock as much as the blues. Is that a British perhaps thing? You've already mentioned people like Clapton and.
Oh yeah, I mean absolutely. I definitely fell in love with all that kind of British blues and blues rock stuff early on when I was learning. It's kind of like when I started getting into blues, it was kind of a combination of these records that a friend of my dad's had loaned me, which was like some Buddy Guy and B.B. King and Stevie Ray Vaughan. And then I was, really into, Zeppelin and Cream, early Jeff Beck group stuff. And so my music has always kind of been sort of a combination of, American blues and blues rock, and definitely a lot of the British blues and blues rock.
I've read somewhere you've got a new album you're working on for release next year. Is that true?
Yeah, we actually, it's recorded, it's mixed. We're moving into the mastering stage right now.
Oh,
and,
cool. Great.
And then there's the artwork stage and sequencing, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited about it. This is kind of the first time that I had a few special guests on a record, and I'd done a few special guests in the past. I had some friends play on some records, and even some people that I didn't know that well. But this time around, just from being in the blues and blues rock world now for a while, I've been able to make friends with some of these guys that I really respect, and so we've got some special guests. I mean, the big special guest on the new record is Walter Trout, and
Wow,
he lives
fantastic.
in Southern California, and I've gotten to hang out with him and play with him and talk with him and everything, and so I just figured, man, I'm just going to ask him. He's just, he's definitely a guy that I really respect and look up to, not only as, guitar player, but just as a guy that's really, overcome a lot of adversity, I guess would be the word.
Hmm.
And he's just a great player and a great guy, and we're thrilled to have him on the record for sure.
When will that be released?
I don't have a release date right now. I'm hoping
Yep.
for, somewhere in the April, May, June neck of the woods.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, sure.
that's kind of what we're hoping at this point.
Very cool. Looking forward to that. That sounds great. Is when you track with that band and with your guests, is that a live sort of thing, or are you putting tracks together bit by bit?
It kind of depends. The last record that we did, Trouble at Your Door, we pretty much
Yeah.
recorded the majority of that live and then overdubbed vocals and, some guitars and whatnot.
Sure.
With this record, I would say most of it was live, but I had also just recently gotten into recording at home on using Logic, the recording program
Oh,
Logic.
okay.
And
Yep.
so I'd
Yeah,
actually
cool.
demoed most of the record at home just because I was, getting used to using the software, and I was, just kind of trying to get all the songs up and running, because then it's like, well, God, if I can demo all the songs and give them to my band, that's gonna save, weeks of rehearsal time. I'll just say, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
go learn
Yeah.
the song, and we'll get together, once or twice, and we'll go, play them live, and then go record it. So what I ended up doing is I ended up kind of falling in love with a few of the things that I did on the demos. There was like
Hmm.
a solo on one song that I just knew I was never going to ever top.
Uh huh.
Because I'm in my office here, and I've got coffee, and and I'm just relaxed, and I just pulled something out, and I was
Yes.
like, no, I got to keep that somehow. So I would say a handful of the record, we ended up taking the demos and just kind of creating a click track at the studio that we
Okay.
record at, and recording the songs to a click so that I could end up using a couple things from the demos. And there's actually a song that I ended up just keeping there's this one track of guitar, and I'm keeping the whole guitar track and the vocal track that I recorded, and we
Cool.
just
Nice.
overdubbed the drums and the bass. And I think, depending upon who you talk to, I mean, there's various schools of thought as far as recording goes. There's it's got to be live, and that's the only way to really capture the vibe. And then there's people that are like, be meticulous and overdub stuff and just get it sounding really tight. And this record's kind of a combination of those two different things. There's definitely some live stuff, and there's definitely some stuff where we recorded to a click and overdubbed some things and stuff. So
Hmm.
I think at the end of the day, it's about the songs and the performances, and yeah, you got to get a good vibe. But I think if you've got the right players and the right attitude, the vibe's going to be there, kind of regardless of how you record it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when someone hears your album, they're either digging it or they're not. They're not really caring how you put it together.
Right, right, exactly.
And with your band, you've obviously worked together for a long time, so you guys know if something's working or not.
Yeah,
So I think that's
yeah,
cool, especially in the digital age. Hey, in the old days, if you're working on a like on a Tascam tape deck or something, 4-track,
yeah,
like it'd be really hard to export stuff out of that and still have it sound good.
right,
But
absolutely.
digitally, you've got that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure, for
Cool,
sure. Yeah, a lot of the plugins are sounding, pretty amazing. So, yeah.
nice. Are you miking up amps, or are you doing some sort of direct thing when you're
When
working at
when
home?
I'm at home, I was just using some of the plugins. So, like I said, there's not a ton of that on the record, but there's a couple songs that are like, the solo on this one song's a plugin, and the guitar and some other songs just entirely a plugin. So it's literally ones and zeros. And
wow.
But then for the rest of the album, we had a bunch of amps and mic'd them up and all that, and got some really cool sounds and tones and whatnot. So
in a lot of the pictures, and I see you in and videos and things, you're on a Sunburst Les Paul. Is that your go-to guitar?
That has been over the years. I experiment a little bit here and there, and when I go out with Alan, it's either that guitar, and then I've got Music Man Steve Morse model as well. And
okay.
Lately I've been doing the Les Paul again, and one of the reasons is it's actually lighter, if you can believe that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's chambered. It's a chambered Les Paul.
Okay,
and
yep.
And I don't know, all the woods that everything's made out of, but the Music Man's a little bit heavier, and I've just been kind of trying to give my back a little bit of a rest. So
sure.
But yeah, I mean that guitar seems to kind of be one that fits in every situation pretty well, that I do. And like the Ernie Ball is the Music Man guitar is great for playing with Alan, and just as far as the different pickup selections I can get and the different tones and stuff. That's a great guitar. And in my band, I usually end up using a Music Man for like slide and whatnot. But the Les Paul tends to be kind of like the go-to. But I mean, I have a few other guitars that I'll play with my band and stuff too. But the Les Paul is definitely kind of the go-to.
Okay, so that must be a newer one, being chambered, a fairly recent.
Yeah, it's
a standard as well.
Yeah, I think it's a 2009, and
okay,
I got it. It was used, and I bought it, and I threw some Seymour Duncan pickups in it, and I just pretty much left it because I basically bought it to take on the road, and so I didn't want to do a bunch of modification. I didn't want to get something, some vintage thing, or get something new that I didn't want to get beaten up or whatever. And
sure.
So I literally bought that guitar to be a hammer, just to be a tool, and it's worked out really well.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think the only other change that I made is I did one of those I put one of those compensated nuts in so that it stays in tune a little bit, because I think Gibsons tend to have a couple tuning issues with like the G string and whatnot. So, but that's the only other thing I've done to it.
Nice. What Seymour Duncans do you put
in that guitar? I've got the Whole Lotta Humbucker set, which is essentially the Jimmy Page model, but they can't say that because then they'd have to probably pay Jimmy Page. But it's a great pickup set. It's kind of based off of some kind of vintage stuff, the old Gibson PFs, but it's got a cool kind of a cool mid-range thing in it that isn't in some of their other pickups. So they make a lot of great pickups if you want something that's kind of older sounding and more vintage output and whatnot. And if you want to do the shred metal stuff, they've got all that stuff too. But.
Sure. Nice. You mentioned the using the Music Man for slide sometimes. Do you play slide in standard?
I do slide in a few different tunings. I do standard. There's a couple songs in my band where we do drop D, and drop D is a really good tuning for slide. And then I also, most of the time I do open tunings. I do open E and capo that if I need to, and also open A, and then I can capo that if I want to. So I kind of go between standard and some open tunings, just kind of depending upon the song. Sure. I'm more comfortable just as far as kind of getting around in some of the open tunings, just because of just the way the intervals are set up, and even some of the chord voicings are cool, so I can kind of get into like a little bit of a different realm in those open tunings. That's a lot of fun.
Do you have any guitars specifically set up for slide, or can you just grab whatever you're playing?
I do. I've got two Music Man Y2Ds. One that I have
Oh, okay.
that's basically set up to go take out on the road with Alan. And then I've got
Yep.
another one it's called the Dark Lord model, which has got a reverse headstock and whatnot. And it's an insane guitar, and it stays in tune so well. And I've been using that pretty exclusively for slide. It just the way it holds, just being in tune, and the string tension, and it's got a little bit of a thicker neck. And so that I've been using a lot for slide. I've had other guitars that I've set up for slide, but the thing that you really have to be careful with is how hard, how heavy of a touch you have with your left hand. And what ends up happening if you don't have a guitar actually kind of set up to play slide, if you're not careful, you just end up banging up your frets. And so the Y2D, the Steve Morse guitar that I have, the Dark Lord, has I think it's stainless steel frets on it, so it's a little bit, built a little bit more like a tank in that regards, and I'm not as worried about digging up the frets, because there's nothing worse than banging up the frets on a guitar and then going to try and play regular guitar on it, and you've got all these divots, and you know what I mean. So it's like,
Sure.
and it's getting a fret change or a fret job isn't the cheapest thing in the world, so I try and maintain the health of the guitars as much as I can.
Absolutely.
I've got one guitar that's kind of a beater knockoff of like a Les Paul Special or something like that. It's some kind of semi no-name brand, and so it was a cheap guitar, and I've got that set up to play slide on as well, like around the house and stuff. It's got like some kind of P90s in it or whatever, so that's a different thing. But I don't really take that out to gig with that much. It doesn't stay in tune as well as the Music Man.
And what are you using for a slide?
I use, I guess it's a Dunlop Pyrex. It's open on both ends. It's kind of a medium thickness, medium length, and I put it on my ring finger. And
okay, yeah,
I use that for electric. On acoustic, I've got a National guitar and a couple acoustics, and sometimes I'll use a brass slide on acoustics and stuff. It kind of gives it a little bit more of an aggressive, older school tone.
Yeah, sure. What acoustics do you play? So a National? That's
I've got a National. It's a lot of fun.
Of guitar.
I've got a cool Yamaha acoustic that's got a cutaway and the pickups and stuff like that, and it's got a bunch of cool tonal options and whatnot. And I've got an older Sigma, which was a kind of like Martin's.
So
Martin not a Martin knockoff, but like I guess it would be like the equivalent of Epiphone or Squire.
Yeah.
And I've got one of those that I've used a lot. That sounds good. So those are kind of my primary. I'm actually due to get like another acoustic one of these days. It'd be nice to have an old Martin or something, but I just don't play enough acoustic to really merit doing that. But
there you go. You've been playing with Alan Parsons or touring since about 2010, I think. How did that all come about?
Well, back in 2002, I did a recording session for a friend of mine that was doing a country rock album, and he was also a DJ on the local rock radio station at the time, and he'd met Alan at some functions. Alan had moved to Southern California, I think, just a little bit before that. And so he was doing some overdubs for his record up at Alan's home studio with another engineer. And so he asked me to come and play on some songs. And so Alan, showed up, and I met Alan there. And then Alan got in touch with me like a year later to play on his last full-length record. And then I just became friends, and would see him around and hang out. And I actually went and sat in with his band a couple times to play the song on his record that I'd played on. And then about 2009, the guitar player that he had, a guy named Godfrey Townsend, had another tour to go do, and so I ended up subbing for Godfrey on a handful of dates. And then in 2010, Alan decided that he wanted a little bit more of a West Coast based band. He's had a band based in England, and then he had a band based on the East Coast, and now the majority of his band is based out here on the West Coast. So he asked me to join in 2010, and I've been doing that ever since.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great. I guess it seemed like you had a fairly organic way of getting to know Alan through the sessions and sort of hanging out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as I know a lot of guitar players, myself included, have been obsessed with how do you get the gig, how do you get the audition, how do you get that spot in that band. And I think that the story's going to probably be different every time. If you were to go talk to every hired gun guitar player that got a gig with an existing band or some legendary rock guy, I think you'd probably hear as many different stories as there were gigs out there. And so that's my story. I mean, it's not to say that the days of the demo tape are gone, but I really think it's really about your relationships and who you know, and staying in the loop out in things, and going out and playing as much as you can. I mean, you literally never know who you're going to meet and what relationship is going to turn into something else. And I mean, that's just kind of proof that you need to be out playing a lot, and you need to be a cool hang, and you got to be willing to put in all the hours and hard work, because it's like you're just not going to get a gig sitting at home, putting out. I mean, I shouldn't say putting out YouTube videos. There are guys that have put out YouTube videos, I'm sure, and gotten gigs, but I think that there's just nothing. There's no substitute for the experience of going out and playing tons of shows and meeting people. I mean, that's
cool.
That's the smart. I think that's the smart thing, and that's also, like you said, the organic thing. That's the real thing that gives, I think, people credibility. Is you go out and you look and see what gigs have done. I was just on your website, and I think you just did a recent thing with Andy Timmons. Yeah. I mean, that guy's been playing. I mean, that guy's probably played like 8 million gigs in his life or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
has done all kinds of different things. And look at him. He's like one of the most respected, guitar players pretty much in the world. One of the very, very best players. And that guy's been out playing, man.
Exactly.
He's out gigging, so.
Yeah, well, that's it. There's no substitute, is there? There's you just got to put the work in. The way you get good is a lot of gigs, a lot of practicing, a lot of hard work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, all the guys I talk to too. It's a labor of love, of course. The guys who are doing well, they're so passionate about playing. That's what propels them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think to kind of stay interested in doing music as a career, guitar as a career, you have to at various times kind of go and reconnect with the original reason that you started playing guitar in the first place, which is just for the love of making a noise.
Yes.
And because there's so many other things that can distract you from that, as far as just the things about trying to book shows, trying to schedule rehearsals, and personality conflicts and egos, and there's all these things to kind of distract you from the actual joy of playing guitar. And I think that's inevitably, those are some of the things that maybe keep some people from pursuing it more. I mean, and then there's also just the being told no so many times and having a certain amount of rejection all the time. It's hard to deal with that. Hey man, can I come play your club? No. Hey man, it's just like, what I mean? So it's like there's so much rejection, I think, well, probably in any of the fields as far as doing art or entertainment, that you just have to kind of get used to that. That's just part of it, and some people aren't built to deal with that, and other people believe in themselves enough to kind of persevere and keep it going.
Yeah, it's definitely another skill set beyond the musical skill, isn't there, to being a working guitar player?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. If there was if there was one thing that I would do differently, if I could go back in time and talk to my 16-year-old or 17-year-old self, it would be, hey man, go take a business class, learn how business works, and work on just your communication skills with people, because those things are so important. When you're trying to book shows, when you're trying, do all these things that are realities, of all working musicians, is just really how to communicate with people and keep things, keep your business sense about you.
Mm-hmm. I think we'd all tell our 16-year-old selves a few things. So,
right, exactly.
They sound like good things that you would have brought up. It sounds like you've worked it out.
Yeah.
So, cool. Hey, back to Alan Parsons. Were you ever overawed that, this is the guy who engineered or co-engineered Dark Side of the Moon? He worked on the last couple of Beatles records.
Oh, yeah. No, man, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was definitely aware of who he was and what his contribution to music was, when I met him. And then as I got to know him and then, got to know his catalog of, the Alan Parsons Project songs, it definitely is one of those things where, I constantly am grateful to work with someone, with his experience and his, pedigree. And, he doesn't talk about a lot of that stuff that much, the Floyd stuff or whatever, the Beatles stuff. But when he does, everyone, everyone stops talking, because they realize, it's you get to hear some of these stories, and it's just like, he was on the rooftop when the Beatles played for the last time. He was at that gig, and so there's just things like that where, it's just like, wow, man, you were there for some pretty crazy stuff, and then you start, also talking about his records and the Alan Parsons Project records and the recording of that stuff and all the guys that played on those albums and everything. And it's definitely a very cool thing to be able to be a part of. And, there's a couple points during the live show where he'll come over and we'll kind of be shoulder to shoulder playing something, and and every single time, I mean, I don't know how many gigs I've played with him at this point, but every single time I get a little like, wow, man, this is really cool. Like, wow,
awesome.
I get to play this song in front of these people with this guy. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So. That's unreal. When I was a little bit unaware of how much stuff was actually his as well, because he uses different vocalists on some of the different material.
Exactly.
For example, Primetime, which you sing in the live set now, that's my favourite Alan Parsons song, but I didn't know it was an Alan Parsons tune.
There you go, yeah.
Originally, but I'm like, I know this song.
I think that was sung by his partner in the project, Eric Wolfson. I'm pretty sure that was Eric singing on that. But yes, that's the thing with, like, I'll have friends that come to shows sometimes, or people go, "Oh man, I didn't know that was one of his songs. I didn't know that was one of his songs."
Yeah, really.
And I think part of that is because there were so many different vocalists, on it that you'd hear these songs on classic rock radio, and maybe the band name would kind of slip by, or you recognize the song, and there's not that many bands like that have had that many different singers on that many different hits. So
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, man, there's a lot of songs that that were Alan Parsons Project songs that maybe people think were, I don't know. I mean, there's kind of like a handful of bands from the mid to late 70s, early 80s, that you might think, oh, I thought that was, I don't know, a Steely Dan song or something like that, or, that people aren't necessarily realize was an Alan song.
Yeah, right. He seems to dig guitars though. Like there's some moments in the live show where you really get to stretch out, like Primetime or Eye in the Sky.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of guitar in that music, and I don't think. I mean, I certainly didn't grow up going, "Oh man, there's a lot of guitar solos in Alan Parsons Project songs." But if you go back through the catalog, and especially in the live set, there's a bunch of solos. There's a bunch of really kind of, cool guitar moments, and yeah, I mean, there's a handful of songs that all maybe cut loose on a little bit, but I think for the most part, it's definitely one of those gigs where you're trying to play the record or something very similar to the record.
Sure.
As far as the solos, but yeah, Primetime, at the outro Primetime, I kind of get to do my thing, and the outro to Eye in the Sky, kind of start the solo off the way it is on the record and then kind of veer off into uncharted lands. but it's also, trying to keep it in the style and in the theme of the situation. And that's been a great lesson to play in a situation where, obviously I hope that some of my personality comes out in my playing, but at the same time, you want to be true to this music and these people that, came to see this show. You want to be true to that vibe as well and not go out on some crazy limb, so.
Yeah, it's a balance, hey. I think you totally pull it off.
Well, thanks, man, because it's, it is a bit of a stretch for me. I mean, I am pretty much a blues rock, classic rock guitar player, and a lot of the guy that played on his records, Ian Berenson, was really coming from like a jazz and kind of classical background and, early progressive rock stuff. And that's not my bag. And so it's really been, a really good challenge for me to learn his parts and learn how to kind of exist in that musical world and still sound like myself,
Very, very cool. Speaking of cool stuff, the Live in Columbia album, I think it came out last year, but you guys recorded that back in 2013.
Yeah.
That looks amazing. You're working with a symphony orchestra on all this great material.
Yeah, man. It's there's a handful of Alan Parsons songs that have orchestra on them, and so we're able to kind of do these songs where we're joined by an orchestra and sometimes even a choir. And and then there's some other songs that that people have over the years, I think, written different kind of scores for some of these other songs here and there. So it's definitely a very interesting experience to kind of be up there. You kind of you feel like, wow, man, I'm up here with all these classically trained musicians. I feel like a musician. I feel like a musician today. But yeah, it's a really cool experience, and especially to me, it's cool when they're rehearsing the parts at like a sound check, and the band isn't actually playing, and you're just hearing the orchestra running through these parts, and it's just like, wow, that's a pretty amazing sound. Because once the band starts going, and whatnot, we use in-ear monitors. So a lot of the
Okay.
stage, you're not really hearing a lot of what's coming off the stage or what's going in out to the PA or whatever to the people. So,
Yeah, sure.
but so yeah, it's definitely there's a few songs where the orchestra just takes it to the roof, just makes it a really incredible presentation of some of those songs.
Must be so exciting. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
the DVD is cool, man. It's it was outdoors at this really kind of unique stage, and it wasn't like it was a normal arena. It was like we were set up kind of in the street across from this big, huge, crazy structure and these big, giant
There's these big
steps.
buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, and so just the setting of it was really different, and so I think it's definitely a very unique live performance in that regard. It's not like it's in a theater or outdoors in an arena or something or something like that. It's just really neat setting. So it was definitely fun to experience that. And now I'm on a DVD.
Fantastic.
And now I'm on a DVD. So that's cool too.
Nice. It's a win-win.
Exactly.
What's your touring rig like for the Alan Parsons stuff?
What's my touring rig?
Yeah.
Well, typically I bring a guitar. So I either bring the Les Paul or the Music Man. And then I've got a pedal board that I bring that's at this point pretty small and compact. I've got one of those pedal train minis or whatever they're called, or I don't know exactly what it's called, but I've got like about 4 or 5 pedals on that. And then amplifier-wise, it's backline stuff. And so when we're in Europe, I've got this great relationship with Hughes and Kettner amplifiers. And so when we're over there, and it depends on where we go, where you're able to get stuff. I definitely try and get their stuff whenever I can. I'll use the Tubemeister series or the Tubemeister Deluxe, which is a newer thing they came out with. And so those will be the amps.
Cool.
And then it's just the pedals, and I keep it pretty simple. If I have a 3-channel amp, that enables me to keep my pedal board really simple. So it's just a tuner into I've got one of those exotic EP boosters. I really like the exotic stuff. You have one of those, and then that goes into a TC Electronics chorus. And I was never really a big chorus user or even a fan necessarily, but for the clean sounds, it just does something. It just, especially in that music, it just really kind of makes this very shimmery sound. Is cool. And then I've got that going into one of the new MXR EVH phasers, and I basically just have that just to kind of live out my rock and roll fantasies. There's nothing like kicking on a little phaser and a guitar solo. So no, it's
you were brought up in the 80s.
What's that?
You were brought up in the 80s.
Well, and the other thing is I adjust that with my foot a lot, like the rate of it.
Okay.
So there's actually some parts in some songs where I'll really crank up the speed, and because I don't bring a wah-wah pedal out on the road, I'll use that for some really subtle parts where I'll kind of try and line it up with the tempo of the song and use that as kind of like a subtle wah-wah effect. And then I'll just put it at a really, really slow rate and just throw it on solos. And it just, it's not like really obvious, but it just kind of gives the guitar like kind of a cool texture during solos. And then that's going into a Strymon El Capistan delay pedal, which is great because it's got a tap tempo function. So I'll use a really kind of long delay on the ballads and do like this kind of tap tempo thing, so it just kind of creates this cool kind of washing effect. And then it's got a favorite switch that you can hit, and then I have that basically programmed for just kind of like a little mild slap back, and I'll put that on for solos just to kind of give a little bit of depth to things. I mean, I like reverb when I play with my band sometimes because a lot of those blues recordings kind of had that, so it's nice to have a little bit of sauce on things sometimes,
Sure. Nice. So you're using the H&K amps there, your distortion sounds with the 3 channels?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. What if you got a gig that hasn't got the Hughes and Kettner? What do you use for your lead tones and things?
Typically there'll be some sort of a Marshall.
Okay.
And those some of those sound really good. I've found that a lot of them vary, as far as the tone that you get. But I mean, that's obviously a classic sound, and so if I get one of those, I prefer to get the TSL, which is the three channels. Yep. I can do the gig with a DSL with the 2 channels. It's just not ideal. And so that's one of the things that I like about the Hughes and Kettner amps too, is that you can get all those tones at a really low volume, whereas Marshalls, you tend to have to turn them up before you get to the sound that you want. But the Hughes and Kettner, you can knock down, the wattage on those things so that they're really quiet, and you're getting, the tube saturation and the tone that you want, because as much as we all like to play really loud, or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've never been into ear-splittingly loud, but you like to get a good tone and turn the amp up and move a little bit of air. But sometimes you can't always do that. Depending on the venue, and what in the front of house guy. I mean, Alan's got a big band. There's a lot of stuff going on, and so the more noise that there is on stage, the harder it is for him to mix the show. So. Sure, we all kind of try and watch our volume levels and be respectful, not only the front of house guy, but anyone that's sitting right in front of the guitar cabinet.
In the front row, that's right.
So
exactly. The has there been any horror stories? Have you ever turned up to a gig and the back line is just a disaster?
Not really. There was one gig where we showed up, and I mean, for the most part, I'm able to get. Some of those Marshalls. There's one gig where we showed up and there's like it was like 100-watt JCM 900, and I just couldn't. I mean, here's the thing, and this is another just kind of guitar concept, is the audience 9 times out of 10 isn't going to know that you're struggling with your tone. Especially in a band that's got that many pieces in it.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit tough. I've had pedal boards go out in the middle of songs here and there. I actually had my pedal board go out like right at the end of prime time when I'm about to launch into my my big moment. No. And then this it's maybe it's a cable that just came a little loose or something, and you're just like, oh come on, but. At the same time, I've learned to kind of accept those moments as they come, and hopefully it's not some live television broadcast, knock on wood, where your gear fails. But that's one of the things that I've learned from being around Alan is just how calm he keeps in all these situations, and that things are going to work themselves out. If like some gear goes down, it's like, well, then skip that tune, or we'll do this. There's ways just to kind of get through that, because I think as a guitar player, here's my big moment. Yes. You're going to have another big moment, but at this time, your pedal board went out.
Yes.
There's nothing you can do about it. So.
Cool. That's a good way to look at it. I like that.
I had a premonition. It's gonna be my turn tonight. It's gonna be my turn tonight. It's gonna be my turn tonight. It's gonna be my turn tonight.
you are working so much. How many gigs per year do you reckon you're doing?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the short answer to that is I think this year I'm going to probably come in at about 150 shows. But I think about 35 to 40 of those were Alan Parsons shows, and
Okay.
close to 100 of those are my band, and then there's a scattered few where I filled in for someone else or went and did a gig, backing up some other people. But and I guess that's a lot of gigs. But man, I mean, if you look and see what like B.B. King's schedule was in the 60s or the 70s or something, or you look at some of these other bands or artists that I see, especially in the blues world, these guys are playing 200, 250 shows and really working hard. And I feel like, I mean, it's not to say that I don't feel like I'm working hard, but you can always be playing more and you can always be working harder. And, but yeah, man, I feel very blessed to be able to do it as much as I am. For sure. I mean, I don't think 150 shows is anything to laugh at, but at the same time, there's guys out there doing more,
Sure.
So, I try and keep all that in perspective for sure.
Someone once described a full-time musician to me as some guy looking for a job every weekend. So
Right. So that's kind of, it's kind of true. It's like when you're, trying to book your band or do something like that, it's like you're kind of applying for the same job over and over again, so that's, it's definitely a humbling experience, I think, until, unless you get into some situation where, people are banging down your door to hire your band to come play things, that you have to be willing to put in that time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you are. It sounds like you things are going really well. So for next year, you've got your new album coming out. That's really great news. Any other stuff going on for next year? For you?
Right now, next year, there's some Alan Parsons dates on the books. We're going to New Zealand in January, so we'll be right across the whatever ocean it is down there. Is that still the Pacific?
It is the Pacific, and the little stretch we call that the Tasman.
Okay.
The Tasman Sea.
Right.
But why are you not here?
I honestly don't know. From what I can tell from booking my band and trying to route my band and doing stuff, that you can't always route things the way that you want to.
Sure.
There's a timing element in all of that. And you would think, hey man, we're going to be in New Zealand, let's pop over to Australia for a gig.
Yeah.
So hopefully, man, I would love to come to Australia, especially that plane trip is supposedly pretty, it's a pretty long one. So, but so we're doing that in January. I've got a bunch of stuff with my band in February around California. I'm going to be going to Germany, it looks like, on my own in March to go do a festival and a show or two. I've got a couple guys over there that I've played with that know my material, so I'm going to do that and get the new album out, and just try and balance all of it. Do the Alan Parsons Live Project shows and do my band in between those, and try and play as much guitar as possible.
Sounds good. Sounds like a good plan.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, hey, Alastair, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show, and let me know when it's all up and running, and I'll share it on all the social media outlets.
Yes, that would be great. Speaking of which, what's the best way for people to keep a hold of what's going on in your world?
If you go to my website, it's alastairgreene.com, and if you have a hard time spelling my name, then you can just type in AG Songs, my initial, and the word songs, and that'll go to my website, and that's got links to all my social media. I maintain, Facebook page and an Instagram account and a Twitter account, and I try and post, the gigs regularly and other, just kind of goofy stuff that's going on, just to kind of, it is the entertainment business after all. So I try and keep all my social media stuff fairly entertaining. It's the majority of it's music, but there's food and beer to post about as well. So.
Absolutely. Definitely. And the odd cat. I see.
Yeah, man. My wife and I, we've got 3 cats, and that's always a fun thing to post about, because they're hilarious. They're like kind of walking. They're like walking comedians. So it's always a good time.
Very cool. All right. That's great. Well, hey, thank you again.
Yeah, man.
And we'll look out for your album and for any Australian detours, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I would love to get over there and keep me posted on what you got going on, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, love to. That'd be great.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Alastair. We'll talk again then.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
All right, there you go. Alastair Greene. What a good guy and an amazing guitar player. Man, I love those long outros where he's just wailing over those chord changes. So cool. As our new friend Jude Gold would say, taking it to the moon and back. All right, so hey, check out Alastair's stuff. AG Songs will get you to his own website and all his latest news and things. Okay, hey, thank you for joining us on the Guitar Speak podcast. If you're enjoying the episodes, please consider sharing them around on your social networks. You can find us also on Instagram and Facebook. You could give us a follow or a like there. That would be fantastic. And why not subscribe? If you have not already, subscribe to us through iTunes or Stitcher, and then you can have the Guitar Speak podcast delivered to you each week with Guitar Speak goodness. All right. Hey, thanks so much again, and we'll catch you next time on the Guitar Speak podcast. My name's Matt Wakeling. Bye now.